Okay, so today we're going to talk about desert animal adaptations. And we're going to do our quick introduction like we always do. We're going to talk about evolution so that you guys understand what adaptations are. And then we're going to go into the cool desert animals and talk about each one. And then we'll go over our homework and I'll give you some more resources and show you a really cool place you can go to find more information. So introducing me, I think all of you guys have joined before, but if you haven't, my name is Megan and I'm Aiden and Lizzie's mom. I work at scientist.com, so I might work with your moms or your dads. And I went to school specifically for science, and I love science, especially biology and things about animals. So I love cool facts about animals and about science, and I like to teach other people. So that's why we're doing this today. Also, as you can see by this confused tortoise, or maybe he's a turtle, I can't tell, but we don't want you guys to be confused by this, right? Because a lot of you are out of school, but your moms and dads are still trying to work, and that's really difficult, and you still need to get an education. So I'm gonna try to help out by doing a couple science things for you guys. And we don't want you to fall behind either. This turtle looks like maybe he's not winning the race, and that's probably not great. Okay, so evolution and adaptations. Some of you might remember this from last time. Do you remember who this guy is? This is Charles Darwin. So he is a super cool guy. He basically went on these super cool sea voyages a long time ago on these giant ships, and he went to the Galapagos Islands. And while he was doing that, he noticed some really cool things about the animals that he was seeing, and he really wondered how they came to be the way they are. So he ended up writing this cool book called The Origin of Species, and that is where we get our theory of evolution from. So Charles Darwin, it took him a long time to write and publish this book, but basically what he wrote is that no two animals are the same, even if they belong to the same species. And animals and plants, because they have to compete with each other for resources and to survive, they have little changes going over time based on that competition. And so over time, all those little tiny changes, they stack and they stack and they stack, and they equal really big changes. And this is over thousands or millions of years. So it's not something we can see with our eyes. But this is a good example that shows in this picture is monkeys or apes evolving into like Neanderthals and then eventually evolving into us, Homo sapiens. So I wanted to show you guys this little tree again too. So this is often called the tree of life. And this is basically an example of how we all maybe evolved from the same like single-celled organism a long time ago. And that cool tree branches off in a whole bunch of different areas. So there's different groups, like up here are vertebrates, and then over here are some invertebrates. And you can see there's like little fish and all sorts of things. And we've all branched off many, many times to become all sorts of different species. Does that make sense to everyone? Good. Okay, so next, we're going to talk about natural selection and adaptations. So this is important for you guys to know. So as animals are competing against each other for resources, they start to, there's variations because no two are the same. And sometimes the ones that are the most successful, they have more babies or they survive longer. And so eventually those cool traits are selected for, and they are able to continue that line to have more animals like that. So the successful ones kind of keep going. And examples of this are the adaptations that you guys saw before with like the elephant seals, and another really cool example of bird beaks and feet being different. So now that you guys know or remember what adaptations are, I'm going to show you some desert animals, and we're going to see what kinds of adaptations those desert animals have that help them survive in the wild. So the first one is the Fennec Fox. Have you guys you might have seen this guy before. Fennec foxes are kind of small little foxes that live in the desert. They live in North Africa and in the Sahara Desert. And they actually are nocturnal, which means they come out at night mostly. And they do that because it's super hot during the day and it cools down a lot at night so they can come out. And they have those silly, silly ears, right? They kind of have bat ears, it almost looks like. And those ears radiate or release body heat, and it helps keep them cool. So their ears during the day, all their heat kind of goes to them, and then it is able to get like wind and stuff like that, and it releases a lot of the heat so they don't stay as hot. They also have really long, thick hair, which seems silly, doesn't it? Like you wouldn't expect a desert animal to have super thick hair, but they have that hair because it insulates them when the nights get really cold, and it also protects them from the hot sun during the day because they don't want to have a fox sunburn. That would be bad. They also have feet that are hairy, which is pretty silly because it spreads out on the sand and helps them walk more, because otherwise their feet would sink into the sand a lot. It's almost like if you use snowshoes ever to walk on. It helps them keep on top of the sand when they're walking. Their feet are also really good at acting as shovels because they actually like to dig a lot, and they live in little dens that are under the ground, and it's nice and cool down in the dens, so they use their little feet like shovels to dig. So I'm going to show you guys another really cool animal now. This is called the thorny devil, and he's a kind of lizard, and he is super spiky. I had never seen this guy before. He's pretty cool. This animal lives in Australia in the outback, and because water in pools in the outback can be really difficult to find, these thorny devils have special skin, and it's almost like their skin is made of paper towels, sort of, because it soaks up water, which is super cool. So at night when it cools down and there's dew that forms, maybe sometimes you guys come out in the morning and you see dew on the grass, from the moisture that collects and it's kind of wet. Well, when that moisture collects on this thorny devil lizard, it's able to suck that water in through its scales, kind of pull the water towards its mouth in the corners, and then it's able to drink it. And actually the lizard's skin even gets darker as it gets wet, and it kind of soaks up all that water. And the other thing is that water doesn't have to be super clean and nice water too. They can actually go into kind of gross, mucky puddles and things like we might splash in, and they hang out in them and soak up the water and drink it. Now this next one is super silly. Look at this huge frog, you guys. You can see there's a grown-up person holding it, and that frog is massive. This is called an African pixie frog, and I don't know why it's called a pixie because it is not small or dainty at all, is it? A long time ago, or maybe not so long ago, people actually thought that these frogs died every time there was a dry season. And then someone discovered that when the rainy season came along again, this frog would come out and it would reappear. And it wasn't a new frog, it was actually the same frog. So they have a cool adaptation where when it gets starts to get to the end of the rainy season, they dig a little burrow with their big old frog feet. You can see they've got some kind of big gross frog fingers on there, and they dig about 6 to 8 inches or a half a foot underground, and they seal itself in a mucus cocoon. So they make mucus with their bodies, kind of like you guys might have heard mucus like from your nose. So they kind of make body boogers almost, and they make a cocoon out of that like caterpillars do. And then that mucus hardens, and that frog can stay in that sack for up to 7 years while it waits for more rain. So it's kind of hibernating down underground in a big dried old sack of frog boogers. And then when the rain comes again, it softens that sack of mucus that they were in, and it wakes up the frog, and then it comes up again. So people thought that they died every season because they sometimes wouldn't be seen for very, very long times, but they actually are just kind of hibernating for a super long time. And there's actually a fish as well that does a similar thing called the South African lungfish. So it's not only this frog that does it, but it's a pretty unusual adaptation. So our next slide is the Mojave Desert Sidewinder. And you guys might have heard of the Mojave Desert. It's actually in the southwestern United States. So it's not too far away from California. It's kind of in like Arizona. And this snake is the Mojave Desert Sidewinder. And you can see from the picture that it's in kind of a crazy S shape. And that's because you might see snakes sometimes that move forward in mostly a straight line, but this one goes all the way sideways while it moves. And it does that because it helps it keep traction on the sand. So if you guys have ever tried to run or walk on the sand, you know it moves under your feet a lot and it can be difficult. But they kind of are spreading out their body so that they can maintain traction to help them move forward. And also it makes it so that only a couple points of their body are touching the ground at any time. So you can see a little bit of a shadow under the snake, and there's only a couple parts on here that are actually touching that really, really hot sand. And if they're going in a long straight line, their whole body would be touching the sand. So it helps keep them cool as well. You guys might have walked in a desert before or gone to the beach when the sun has been shining down on the sand, and it does get really, really hot on your feet. And if you can imagine, as a snake, you probably wouldn't want to rub your belly all over that super hot sand. So they just have little parts that are touching at any time. Our next animal with an adaptation is the Cape ground squirrel. Now this guy doesn't look that special, does he? I thought he just looked like a normal squirrel or a chipmunk that I see outside, but then I noticed that he has his tail kind of up and over his head, which seems pretty silly. And these squirrels actually use their head and or their brushy, bushy tails. They use it to cover their head and their neck and their backs, and they use it almost like an umbrella. So if you guys have ever worn a big hat with a big brim to keep the sun off of you, or had an umbrella to keep the sun from burning you, or maybe been in a tent, it's kind of like that. They're carrying their own umbrella on their backs or on their bums with their brushy tail. And they also keep their temperatures down by dust bathing. So some pets and animals that we have, like mice and rats and things, or chinchillas especially, like to dust bathe. And let's see, my chickens used to dust bathe a lot too. So they roll around in the dust and they use that to kind of collect oils and things from their bodies and then shake it all off. And that actually helps them stay cool as well. They don't just use their cool tail though to keep cool. They actually use it to fight back when predators come after them. So sometimes all the squirrels will rush at a predator, like say a wild dog came and there was a pack of these squirrels and they were going to fight it. They would all rush in and they would use their tails as a blocking device. So they might all put their tails up to try to scare the predator away or to keep it away from their babies. And that behavior is called mobbing. And usually it's enough to scare those predators away so that they don't snatch their babies or anything like that. And the next one, I bet you guys know about this guy. This is a camel. So you can see there's different kinds of camels. There's the dromedary camel that has just the one hump on its back. And then I have a picture of a Bactrian camel that's got two humps. And I remember when I was a kid, I thought that there was water in the camel's hump that they drank. Has anybody heard that rumor before? No? Well, okay, good, one person has. So actually, the camels use their humps to help them drink, but it's not filled with water like a big water jug. It's actually filled with fat. And so the hump that stores fat, they can use that as basically a food source. Their body can break that down for energy, and it can also break it down into water. So when it's really, really tough and they can't find food or water to drink, they start to break down the fat in that hump. And the fat will actually, and in that hump will shrink down over time too, if they start to use a lot of the fat. And then when they get to eat a lot more again, it might grow back up with lots of fat. They also have very special hairs in their ears and special eyelashes that help keep sand out of them. I bet it would not be fun at all to have a bunch of sand in your ears and eyes, and you wouldn't be able to see or anything. And as you can imagine, when the camels are in the desert, there's lots of wind blowing around and blowing the sand, and it would be pretty tough on them if it was in their eyes all the time. They wouldn't be able to see. And they also are able to close their nostrils. So your nostrils are these little holes on the bottom of your nose that we breathe through, and camels are able to flex their noses to close them automatically, so then they don't get any sand in their noses. But I don't think they probably talk like that when they close their nostrils. So these camels can actually survive for quite a while, maybe a week or more without water and several months without food. And they can lose almost half of their body weight and still survive. But then once that happens, they get really, really thirsty, right? Because they've used up all the water that they've converted from fat in their hump. And they can drink up to 32 gallons of water in one session. So if you guys think about a big jug of milk, that's a gallon. And if you had 32 of those filled with water, a camel can drink all of that in one sitting. So for Carmen and Ines, that's about 145 liters. So it's a lot of liquid. And they basically are filling back up after they've used all of their resources that their body can allow. So camels are super specialized. And before, when I talked about the Fennec Fox being able to have had kind of snowshoe feet, camels do too. So they have wide feet that can spread out across the sand and give them traction and help them stay on top. Our next cool animal that you guys might have seen before is called the Gila monster. And it's not really a monster, it's actually a lizard. And these are in the deserts in like Arizona. And this lizard has a very interesting adaptation. It's kind of like the camel, but it's storing fat somewhere else. It doesn't have a hump, but do you see what's kind of wide on this lizard? Its tail. So it's got that big, fat, funny tail, and they keep fat in there. That helps them stay during the winter in the desert. They can stay in their burrows that they dig with their claws, and they can stay in there for a couple months, just living off the fat that's in their tail. And then when springtime comes, they come back out of their burrows and they eat and eat and eat and try to build up the fat stores in their tail once again. So when they come out, their tails are actually a little bit skinnier, which is kind of silly to imagine. Now this one is the first bird I've showed you guys, and I think this is super cool. This is called a sand grouse. And you can see here that it's in a puddle of water doing something kind of silly. And there's about 16 or so different species of these sand grouse, and they live in Africa and Asia, and they live in some of the driest environments in the world. So if you look, this is a grown-up bird, but when they have chicks, the chicks need water. So even if the adults could survive for a while, what happens when their chicks are born and they're thirsty? These birds go to the water and they carry water back to the chicks in their feathers. So basically they sit down in the water and they wiggle around a bunch, and they have these cool coiled kind of extensions. They have fancy feathers basically on their tummies, and they can soak up about 2 tablespoons of water with their feathers, and then they run back to the babies, and then the babies use their bills to kind of pull the water out and get the water from their dad's belly feathers, which I think is pretty crazy. I've never heard of that before. And so the dad sand grouse will go back and forth as many times as he needs to get water for the chicks, and then they'll kind of squeegee it out of the feathers every time. This next one has kind of a silly name. This is the Dorcas gazelle, and they are so well adapted to the desert that they never have to drink. So they can actually get all the moisture that they need from their diet. So they will drink if they can, but mostly they get the water from the things that they're already eating. And they come out during the day when it's really hot, but if it gets too hot, then they'll hang out at night, kind of like the Fennec Fox when it's cooler. And they actually eat differently depending on how hot it is outside. So when it's very dry, they mainly eat like the leaves and pods of the acacia trees because those have lots of moisture in them. But during the wet season, they'll eat like a lot of grass and things if they can get it. So they will drink water if they can find it, but mostly they get everything that they need from their diet. And when water is unavailable and the gazelle needs to really save as much water as it can, it doesn't want to excrete all that water in its urine. So basically when most animals go pee, there's a lot of water in there, but they don't want to waste all that water. So they concentrate down their uric acid, which if you guys have ever seen a bird dropping, that's kind of the white part is actually the uric acid. And so these gazelles can basically go pee and there's like a white pellet and they don't release any water at all. So they conserve almost all of the water that they eat or drink, which is pretty efficient because most animals have to drink a lot of water. Like us, we have to drink lots and lots of water and we still release it out of our system, but they are very, very efficient, which is pretty cool. The next bird I want to show you guys is the greater roadrunner. And I got to see one of these when I was in Death Valley. at the national park, and there was a road runner that came by the visitors center every day at the same time, and he would have a very big fight, and he was fighting with his reflection in the window. So every day at 3 o'clock, he came by the visitor center and looked at himself, and he would puff up and he would peck the reflection and have a big argument and flap around, and then he would leave. And I guess he did that every day. But these birds, because they live in some of these really inhospitable or difficult to live in environments like the desert, they save almost all their water in their bodies, kind of like the gazelle that I told you about before. And so when they're doing that, minerals and things that are usually in the urine that they excrete can build up in their systems, and that's not very good. So the roadrunner has this cool gland near its eye that they actually use to get rid of salt. So they will excrete excess salt from a gland near its eye, and it's just in front of the eye. And then that means that they use less water to get rid of that salt than they would if they were urinating normally. And so it's pretty cool. It also allows them to try to eat more moisture-rich prey. So if you think about some of the bugs and things that they might eat have a lot of moisture in them, and so they can get a lot of fluids from that, and then they don't have to get rid of their salt the normal way, like through their kidneys, like humans do. They can just basically cry really, really salty tears. Hopefully they're not crying because they're sad. They're just getting rid of that salt. But they also, if you see, this one has that funny red and blue area on its face. That's a super colorful thing that you see in the males during breeding season when they're trying to show off and say, look at how handsome I am. Their face can actually change color. But they also have some pretty cool feathers that are beneath their chin. So if you look, it looks kind of like he's got a little goatee or like a little bit of fuzz underneath his chin. And that's because the skin there has almost no feathers on it. It's just got some little wispy feathers, and they can flutter that and puff it up, kind of like when frogs puff up their chins, but it helps them to get rid of heat. So the wind can come across and it releases that excess heat, and it helps them stay cool as well. Okay, next is the kangaroo, and there's a whole bunch of different kinds of kangaroos. I'm sure you guys know that, but kangaroos do something really, really silly that I didn't know about. They actually stay cool by licking their front legs, and then they have a lot of blood vessels towards the surface. So remember how we talked about elephant seals constricting all their blood vessels to keep heat in? Well, kangaroos kind of do the opposite. They have all these blood vessels going through their forearms, and so they go blah, 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 and they cover them with kangaroo spit, and then the wind comes across and it cools them down. So they actually use their forearms for kind of kangaroo air conditioning. I don't think they probably smell very good because of that. I don't think they brush their kangaroo teeth, but they also can reduce their body temperature through that, and they can't sweat. So because kangaroos can't sweat, they pretty much have only that one option. So maybe they smell better because they can't sweat, but then they smell worse because they're licking their arms all the time. I've never smelled a kangaroo. So if you guys have seen them at the zoo and can tell me if they're smelly, I really am curious about it. They also are able to go for a really long time without water because their digestive system is super efficient, like I told you before. So almost every drop of water that's in the food that they eat, their digestive system soaks up right away. So when they go potty, it's almost completely dry pellets because they're using all of the water in their body really efficiently. This one's kind of scary. Ooh, it's a scorpion. I don't like these scorpions at all, but I didn't realize they were really well adapted to the desert. So they live in places where during the day it can be like boiling hot, and at the night it's freezing. So the temperature goes really high and really low, and they have to be able to adapt to both of those situations. So they can even actually freeze solid overnight and then thaw and return to life the next day, which is totally crazy. You could put a scorpion in your freezer and then pull it out again, and it could be alive. So they can do that because they slow their metabolism way down. And you guys might remember that we talked about that before, different animals being able to slow down their metabolism, but scorpions are super good at it. And they also can break down food and energy really quickly, so they can kind of eat a lot, and they don't break it down quickly. So they can eat a lot and just store that energy for super long periods of time. Okay, just a couple more. This one is called a sandfish, which I thought was really confusing because it's not actually a fish. It's a lizard called a skink. And we have these in North Africa and Asia. And they're called a sandfish because they almost look like they can swim through the sand in the desert. And they're super efficient at it. And that also helps them stay out of the sun so that they don't get burned. So basically they're in the sand where it's cool instead of on top of the sand. And they move their legs kind of like when we crawl when we're swimming, like a front stroke or a free stroke. And they can basically scoot around in the grains of sand. And because they're under sand all the time, they don't want to get it all in their mouths, and they have to still be able to breathe, right? So they have some pretty cool adaptations that help keep all of those out. So they have scales that cover their ear openings. They have transparent eyelid scales, so they can basically close their eyes but still see out of them. And they do that so that they keep all the sand out while they're swimming through the sand, which I think is pretty cool. It'd be like if we were able to close our eyes but still see everything and then close our eyes again. So they have kind of two sets of eyelids. Okay, this is the final one. So this is the desert tortoise, and you guys might remember we talked about Mojave Max during the tracking lesson. And desert tortoises actually can do something really cool. They have a secret inside their shell, and that's that they can carry a whole bunch of water in there. So they have a very, very large bladder. And so when they drink or eat things that have water in it, they can carry all that extra water with them for a very long time. So they can go for a super long time through the desert without eating or drinking because they're actually carrying like a water pack with them. We just can't see it. Okay, that was the last animal. So real quickly, I'm going to go through homework, and then I'm going to show you guys some cool resources that you can use. So little kids, you can draw me a picture of any desert animal or an adaptation of your choice. Big kids can draw a picture of a desert animal and label the adaptations. You can make it about how you would survive in the desert, or you can look up information on a desert animal that you like and show me what their adaptations are. And then middle schoolers can write a paragraph explaining the adaptations of your favorite animal. You can draw a map for your favorite species and explain how it relates to their adaptations. Or you can create a comic about surviving in the desert and what adaptations you might need if you were an animal. And as always, if you email your homework to me, scientist.com is sponsoring us, and we can draw for a $10 Amazon gift card. So there's a bunch of resources I have for you here about specific animals, but I wanted to also make sure I showed you this cool site. I really recommend this. It's from the San Diego Zoo. And you can click here on animals and plants, and you can look at different facts about them, but you can also look at live cameras to see what the animals in the zoo are doing at any time, which I think is pretty fun. But if you scroll down, you can see lots of different animals and click on them to learn more facts about them. And that's where I got a lot of information for the last couple of classes, and I really enjoyed it. You can also click on some of these and go directly to their cameras. So if you want to see what I don't know what that is, a babirusa. See, that's a new thing. It's called a pig deer. You could click on that and see what they're up to. The San Diego Zoo also has a cool thing called the virtual mission for spring break. And it has 101 things to do. So you can click on this link and it'll give you this cool PDF with 101 activities. So it's basically you can explore the zoo even though you're not there. So you can look for an exhibit with one type of animal and figure out how the animal is like you, or how is it different, for example. And you can go through all these and do a couple of them if you want, and you can do that for homework too, if you wish. So that is all I had for today. It was really great talking to you guys. Hi, Audrey. And if you guys have any topics that you want to learn about, I haven't picked one for next week yet. So if there's something that you're interested in, have your moms or dads email me and we will talk about it next time, okay?